Good morning, gentlemen. Welcome to the Complete with Purdeep Show. My name is Purdeep Sangha, and I'm going to be your host. And I want to first of all thank you for joining us today. Our show goes live Thursday mornings, every Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, so hopefully you can join us. And before we get going, I appreciate it if you could please like and share this with your network, because the more we get the word out there, the more men we can help, the better. Stay tuned, because in a few minutes, I'm going to bring on an awesome guest. You're definitely going to want to hear what he has to say, especially if you're a parent. If you have young kids that you are trying to train to be athletes or just be successful in life, you're going to want to hear what this gentleman has to say, because he's worked with some of the best in one of the top, you can say, business industries out there. So today is an interesting day for me. I guess I'm an open book, because this show is all about being transparent. It's about being authentic. It's about sharing all the things that we have, the thoughts that we have as men going through our minds that we don't necessarily share. And it's been a really interesting couple of days for my family. Yesterday, I took my dog to the vet because she was having some challenges. She's 14 years old, and my best friend since she was a puppy, and we took her in because she was having this growth on her leg, and we knew we were getting close to that time where we would have to make a decision, but he confirmed it that she does have a form of bone cancer and that it's spreading aggressively. So for the last couple of days, my family and I have been dealing with that, and today's the day that we're gonna have to take her in and say goodbye to her forever. So there's a slight possibility that I might actually get interrupted during the show, because she is old and I'm the only person in the house that can actually pick her up. So I just want to give you a heads up. But it's been really tough for us as a family. It's one of the things that, again, as a father, as a husband, and the caretaker, obviously, of our dog, sometimes we have to make choices. And I had a lot of stuff going on yesterday for business. I have a lot of stuff that I was supposed to be doing today. But I made the choice of canceling pretty much 90% of everything that I was going to do so I could spend time with the family. My kids were upset. My wife was upset. But as men, it's our role to basically set the priorities that we should be setting. So is it work? Is it family? In my particular case, in my opinion, family always comes first, regardless of what happens. Because if we don't take care of our families first, what are we working so hard for? Why are we spending those long hours, days, evenings, sweating, blood, sweat, and tears? We're doing it so we could actually provide for our families. So I just want to leave you with that, because one of the biggest challenges that I see for men, especially high-performing men, is they're always challenged with the work-life balance. If I was to ask 9 guys or 10 guys, what their biggest challenges in life, I can bet you anything, because I've done it, is 8 or 9 of them, 90% of them will say that it's the work-life balance. That is their biggest challenge. It's not the actual job that they're doing or the career that they're doing or the business. It's trying to balance it successfully with a family, trying to be there for everybody, because men, naturally, we're there to care for other people. We're there to protect other people. We're there to protect the ones that we love. But we have this internal drive inside of us. We have this drive to achieve. We have this drive to compete. And you're definitely going to want to, again, stay tuned for this guest that's coming on, because he knows guys who like to compete, and he can give you the ins and outs and the inside scoop in terms of what that looks like. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I want to bring him on because he's got a ton of value to share. So thank you, Pratik Patel, for joining us today. For those of you out here watching, Pratik is a high-performance coach. He works in the realms of diet, nutrition, exercise, and he's also coached athletes in the NFL. So Pratik, I was going to say my own name there, but thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so this is I'm fortunate to have you on the show. Thank you. You were actually on another podcast that I host, the Coaches Council. Justin there, and you guys are both high performance coaches, and you guys coach athletes. So I knew I had to get you on and speak about this particular topic, which is how to raise healthy and happy kids and athletic kids. But we'll get into that in a bit. I just want you to tell the audience here, the guys out there, a little bit about your background so they know where you came from.
Yeah, I'm currently an online, health performance and fitness coach, registered as a dietitian, background as a strength and conditioning coach. So for 11 years, I spent time working in team sports with stops at Kansas State University, Michigan State, University of Oregon, and most recently in the NFL with the New York Giants, where I held a dual role looking at performance, nutrition, fitness, and helping the players with sleep and recovery, and connecting all those different dots between all of those. Originally from Kansas, grew up playing sports, Didn't really know what I was doing. Wasn't the best athlete, but kind of faked until I made it. And enjoyed playing in high school. Did track and football, and just fell in love with the whole concept of training, nutrition, being able to change your body, what it can actually do for your life, and how much it's benefited me. And my goal is to be able to share that information with as many people as possible, whether it's athletes, non-athletes, adults, and even more importantly, youth athletes, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of youth athletes out there that just don't get the resources and knowledge, and they aren't taught exactly what they can and should be doing to really just enjoy the sports that they're playing and be able to benefit and transform their lives.
Yeah, that's incredible. And when you talk about the performance space or the personal training space or the diet space, weight loss, we're all talking about people feeling and looking better, man. That is one of the biggest industries out there, as you mentioned. It's massive. And I've seen people amass great wealth just by doing this. I've seen people just lose weight or get fit themselves and start training other people and build a successful following or business as a result of that. It's a huge industry. I think everybody is just wanting to be healthy, but not everybody is. So but it goes to that problem that you talk about. There's just way too much information out there, and there's way too, I would say, and this isn't to bash anybody, it's just, I would say, so-called gurus. Everybody has a fad in terms of what they follow. But the thing I appreciate about the work that you do is there's information to back it up. There's science, there's data, right? Because when you're training athletes, you're not just doing it off of, your gut feel, which I'm assuming there's some parts are, but you have information to back it up. So you were a trainer in the NFL. You were training NFL players. What was that like?
It was incredible. It's one of those things that you don't really realize it until you're there. And now that I'm done with that part of my life, you take a step back and look like, man, I was actually a coach in the NFL working with some of the biggest names that, came through that organization. And like for me, you're never really going to make somebody at that level that much better because they're naturally talented. They have their own drive. They're genetically different compared to everybody else, and they're very skilled at what they do. So the goal was to always understand, can I learn about this guy top to bottom? Can I get him to trust me? And what can I find that we can tweak, little things here and there that's going to actually help him, that he can feel a difference and be like, man, I wish I would have done this years ago. Or man, I feel so much better than I did, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I wish I would have been doing this all along. So it's one of those things where you understand who you're working with and you kind of look at them top to bottom. And with professional athletes, it's really developing the relationship more than showing, hey, this is how much I know. These are my degrees. These are all the other places I've worked with, because they're getting millions of dollars and they haven't even needed your help at all. So just understanding, how can I connect with this guy and what can I actually do for him that he can see a benefit, because we've got such a short amount of time with the players. I think people don't necessarily realize that about 4, 5, 6 months out of the year, they're on their own. There's down periods. There's times where they're doing training on their own, not with the team in the facility. So that's a big part of it, is maximizing that small amount of time that you have with them.
Wow. I didn't realize that. What you just said is just completely, I'm not going to say foreign, but it's an aha moment for me, where you say these players are naturally gifted. We kind of have a thought about that, but you're not actually helping them from that standpoint. Like what you just said about finding them or their specific talent or their specific style and just tweaking it slightly. That's actually pretty phenomenal when you think about it. That's almost like an art. That's a specific skill. I could see that, because they probably have a chip on their shoulder too, if I'm correct, that they might be like, who is this young guy coming in trying to tell me what to do? I'm one of the best athletes out there.
Yeah, and I think it's all about how you approach it. And again, it's a relationship business, because it is a player-driven league. If you have a coach or you have a staff member or somebody who's just trying to crack the whip and just enforcing their priorities and their protocols on the players without actually understanding, who's this guy behind, the helmet and underneath the shoulder pads? Like, what is he going through? How much information does he even care about this? Because sometimes the priorities might be there in another realm. They might be thinking about their family, they might be thinking about their bank account, they might be thinking about their brand or social media status. So even though they know that, yeah, training is important, nutrition is important, it might just be on the bottom of their list of things that they actually care about at that time. So, getting a chance to learn about them, like what's going on at home, where are you from, what are things you like, what do you like to do in your spare time? A lot of these guys, they love social media, they love games, they love trying to build a brand. So it's just finding that common ground. They love Jordans, they love watches, cars, like, stuff that most guys all like. So it's like, cool, I like that stuff too. Tell me what you like. You're like, all right, well, I'll tell you what I like. And then you can say, hey, I saw you in practice. Someone's off, like, hey, tell me what's going on. Or I said, we're in the weight room. This set wasn't that great. Like, hey, what about, doing it this way, and I'll coach you up and help you out. I'm like, okay, yeah, now I trust this guy, and I'm going to be more willing to take his advice instead of, somebody who might be older than me or the same age as me, and me trying to just tell them, hey, oh, no, that's wrong. Oh, I saw what you're reading. You can't do that. And they're looking at me like, what? Who's this person telling me this stuff?
Wow, you know what? It's so simple what you just said, but you're telling me that guys actually have feelings, that guys actually get worried about their families, and that they're preoccupied by other things in life. Where we at the other end of the TV are watching these super athletes saying these guys are robots, they're phenomenal, they're machines, right? They don't think about anything else. They're just go, go, go. Thank you for pointing that out, because I think that's so critical and that's so important.
And I think there's just a big misconception. You have a small handful of players that get the big contracts, and that's what gets put out there on ESPN and Bleacher Report. You see, like, Messi just signed a $600 million contract. Patrick Mahomes signed a $500 million contract. And again, they're worth it. That's why they have those contracts, because those are smart decisions that the teams need to make. But then you have the 51 other guys on the team that aren't making that much comparatively. You got practice squad players. You have guys on one-year deals. You have guys that are becoming free agents, and they don't know where they're going to play next year. They don't know if they're going to have a job, or they have a lingering injury, and they're worried, man, if I get injured, I get put on injured reserve, I might get a settlement and cut, and then I'm back on the street, and then there's no money coming through. So I think that's the side that a lot of people don't necessarily get to see, and that's something I took for granted before getting into that position. But when you're in it and you see it, it makes sense. You're like, oh man, it's a business, but it's also a people business. But organizations have to do what's best for the team in general. So again, with players come and go, coaches come and go, staff members come and go, it's not personal. It's what's best for the organization to move forward, to continue to be able to function like it needs to.
So when people talk about that, because we hear stuff on the news, for example, about athletes and conflicts between coaches and GMs and owners and all this kind of stuff, do you truly feel like there is that environment? Or maybe I shouldn't say that as a general, but the teams that you've worked on, or maybe even seen outside, maybe not the teams that you worked on, do they truly care about the organization? Like, is it that approach, or do you think everybody just kind of cares for themselves? Excuse me.
I think it's a little bit of both. I'd say if you're a staff member or coach, you're definitely going to be aligned with the organization, because again, the person doing your evaluation is going to be, the head coach of the GM, and then that's just going to set contracts. So sometimes GMs are separate from head coaches, and it's just different with every team. It's just interesting how the dynamics play out. Players are a little bit more on their own. Obviously, they're taken care of by the organization. It depends on the organization, how many resources they provide to the players, what they have access to, how well they take care of them. And it is very different. And I was fortunate to be part of an organization that really put an emphasis on taking care of the players, the coaches, and staff, a family type organization that was one of the cornerstones of founding the NFL. So the Giants and Bears were the two main ones, the House and the Maras. But I think it's very different in situation. Like, some players definitely have a lot more say and a lot more of a voice in an organization, especially if it's a player that's been there a long time and has been very successful, is ingrained in the community. The fan base loves them and wants them, and they're paying money to see this player. So you kind of have to pander to that, and you want to make sure that you take care of this player. But if you get caught in situations where, a new staff comes in, a new GM comes in, and they're looking at running different systems, and they want to overhaul the roster, and you're looking at the salary cap and the ramifications of that, how much dead money is there, who's taking up most of the salary cap. Sometimes that's why you see some of these big name players getting either cut or traded, because the long-term plan of the GM and head coach is going in a different direction. And the players that were there when they signed those initial deals might have been with a former coach and a former GM with another plan. So again, it goes to the saying, whoever's in charge, who has the vision, they're going to want to put their pieces in place. So that's why you see a lot of these high name players, big name players that have large contracts kind of just get traded or shipped off. And that's what just happened with Jared Goff and Matt Stafford. Goff had a massive contract. Stafford was at the tail end of his. The Rams and the Lions ended up trading, picks and quarterbacks to try to figure out, all right, well, how do you make this thing work? Because it's a very imperfect system, and you just kind of have to guess sometimes and figure it out as you go along.
Interesting. So what's your, I guess, the toughest part of your journey when you were in the NFL? what do you think was the toughest element of it?
I'd say probably two things. One was the 3 years I was with the Giants, 3.5 years, but 3 full seasons, was unfortunately the worst 3 years in the history of the franchise. So I came on after the 2016 season. Ben McAdoo was hired in 2016. He was the offensive coordinator, and they had a great season. They went 11-5. They made the playoffs. Lost a tough game in Green Bay, and then the next year there was a lot of expectations because the defense was really good. The offense was, I mean, it was basically Eli and Odell and Sterling Shepard just doing what they were doing. And everybody's like, oh man, the core of the defense is still there. Maybe you get a free agent here or two, upgrade one or two pieces, and then you try to just focus on the offense, which was lacking. And so that was a priority in the offseason with the draft and some free agent pickups and acquisitions. And then everybody's saying, oh, the Giants, they've got the makings of a Super Bowl. They've always been really good on defense. The offense doesn't have to be spectacular. Eli's been there. He can do it. And then everything just falls off. You know, you have injuries to key players. We start 0-5 or 0-6, and it just looks like, yeah, a chance for the division is outside. Wild card, probably not. And then things keep progressing. And the head coach that I was hired to work for gets let go almost 3/4 of the way through the season. So does the GM. So I'm like, all right, well, maybe this is it. And this was my opportunity to work in the NFL. I understand this wasn't, the timing was right, but luckily got retained by the team. So second year, new head coach, do a little bit better than the previous year. So again, there's expectations going into the third year. Third year, you do worse than the second year. So for me, it was keeping my head on, understanding that even in the middle of a season where you know there's not going to be a postseason, you might be let go at the end of the season, just doing everything that I could, continuing to try to grow and learn as much as I can, provide value to the players, to the organization. That was one of the biggest pieces. And then the second was working as much as you do. Like when you work in sports, there's just an unwritten rule. There's a certain number of hours that are required. You know, once the team gets into training camp, because of the way the schedule is, I mean, you're playing a game every week. So everything you do during the week is prepping you for game day. So it's 7 days of work from the beginning of training camp to the end of the season. Unless, you know, you've got a bye week in there where you might get a couple days off, but you know, the players might get 3 or 4 days off, but then they're back in the building getting ready for the next game. You know, you might get 1 or 2 days off as a coach, but you're still like, you know, you're looking at evaluating the previous week, what's going on with the injury roster, what's going on the practice field, what do our, you know, assessment numbers look like, what kind of transitions and changes do we need to be making to what we're providing and doing for the players, you know, what kind of education and follow-ups do we need to be doing. So you're working nonstop. So for me, it was understanding that, you know, you work so much, you don't have much of a social life because the time that you have outside, you want to continue to develop and hone your craft. So you don't want to get complacent. You don't want to get stuck in the dust because you want to be the best that you can be to prove to your organization that you are the person for that job, and then they can trust you. So spending time studying and reading and learning and not taking advantage of, you know, being in New York and New Jersey, where you've got, you know, one of the biggest and best cities in the world, getting a chance to be social and finding that time between, all right, I can dedicate majority of my time to work, but I also need to make sure that I'm taking a step back and, you know, making time for friends and family and talking to, you know, mom, dad, sister, all that.
Yeah, I remember asking you behind stage, and I said, you know, you got a family, and you're talking about how tough it is. I can see that. That's a lot of sacrifice because relationships take a lot of energy. And like you said, you know, you had to put your time into your work and your athletes, which I commend you for, because I think it's a lot of people take it for granted that we see the sports live, but there's so much that happens behind the stages, and you're one of those key members that are helping. And so thanks for that. And then the other previous point where you talked about sometimes you just got to go through the tough times to get through to the good times, right? You know, you can't. I can't imagine what it feels like to be with a team that's not winning and trying to put everything into it. Like that's got to be tough, especially assuming you, just like the players, are competitive, right? Everybody's in that sport because they're competitive in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to jump right into it. I want to ask you, because you work with younger people now. So let's talk about this, because there's so many theories out there. There's so many, you could say, information in terms of how to train your kids to be athletic, but also successful, have a good work ethic. Because I think as a father, I'm just going to speak for myself. I have two young kids. This is one of the things that I want both my kids. I have a 7-year-old boy. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I want them both to be athletic. I don't necessarily need them to be athletes, but I want them to be able to, if they want to play a sport at some point, if they want to be able to swim, that they actually do it properly. Like they're not the slowest kid. They're not, trying to keep up. They have to catch their breath. Part of me, I'm competitive, but from a different perspective. So can you share your thoughts in terms of how to raise or how to train kids? Because again, you and I talked about this behind backstage, is there's this whole culture of, okay, everybody's a winner, right? Don't push your kids too hard, all of this stuff. And so parents are so confused right now. So what, from your perspective, do you think is the right way to raise your kids to be athletes and be successful in life?
I think, if we look at this from what's been published with, long-term athlete development, starting from a really young age, it's just finding what your kids are really interested in, not pushing it really hard, and not everybody has to be Tiger Woods where, his dad gave him a golf club at, 1, 2 years old, and then it just started from there. And again, that's very few and far between. I don't really recommend most people do that because he's 1 in 6 billion. But I think it's just understanding what they like to do. They like to throw balls. They like to kick. They like to chase things. They like to run around. They have a ton of energy. And at that young age, it's not focusing on specific sport tasks like, oh, you need to be able to kick a ball at 3 years old and do it this way. It's like, if you're talking about trying to figure out if your kids have athleticism, like let them run around, let them play tag, let them play around in the neighborhood. If they have a bike, let them ride bikes. Let them do all these different things like, front roll, back roll, change of direction. That way they just gain some basic athletic ability instead of really focusing on specific tasks that sports would need. So it could be just, playing catch with them in the yard, kicking the ball around with them, going out in the park, throwing frisbees, freeze tag, all these different games that we used to play as kids that somehow have gotten forgotten with this new generation of kids that are growing up. They're in front of screens all the time, unfortunately. It's just getting them used to moving and having an appreciation and love for moving, going out and swimming when it's hot, exposing them to a lot of different things. And then as they start to get a little bit older and you see that, oh, they really like soccer or they really like basketball. Now it's like, all right, now we can try to teach them more the ins and outs of skill development. Like, hey, this is how you dribble. This is how you shoot. This is how you pass the ball. And then getting them into little organized group activities. So when I was growing up, it was the GABL, the Great American Basketball League. That's where most elementary school kids play basketball. And soccer, it's the American Youth Soccer, AYSO. I played soccer growing up, but I just loved to play sports, and I wasn't necessarily the best at it, but I wasn't the worst. But it was interesting and intriguing to me that I wanted to continue on. My parents were very supportive. It wasn't, you have to specialize in one sport, which I think sometimes people, they want their kid to be the next Patrick Mahomes. They want their kid to be the next Aaron Judge. I mean, unless he's 6'7", good luck. But I think youth sports specialization is really burning kids out too. When they get exposed to just one thing all the time, it's the only thing that they do. And then they see their other friends playing a lot of other sports. Some are like, well, I'm basketball, and then I'm track, and then I'm baseball, and then I'm football, and I play it all year round, and I'm happy. So the kids don't necessarily have to take time off, because in between them changing seasons, they get a little bit of downtime. They don't have to work the same muscle groups over, so they don't have the increased risk of injury, as opposed to a kid who's a pitcher who's been pitching since he was a kid. I'm like, well, you're only going through one motion. You're overdoing it. You don't have appropriate recovery. No one's really talked to them about the benefits of, really good nutrition and sleep. So I think, I'm thinking about this as from my sister's perspective too, because she's a mother of 2, 5, and 3. And right now it's just, I'm teaching them how to throw a ball, let's play catch, let's play with the bouncy balls. Hey, we've got the Fisher Price little goal set up. Like, hey, let's just throw balls and try to make them in the basket. And, they were part of soccer too, where it was just them running around, kicking the ball, trying to get it in the net. And as he gets older, both of them, if they start showing a little bit more aptitude in a certain sport, it's like, all right, let's maybe try this one and then complement it with another one instead of just focusing on a single sport. And I think that's where a lot of kids are getting caught up, where there's a focus too much on a sport early enough. There's too much specialization, and then they get burnt out, or they end up getting injured because they haven't had the chance to develop their bodies. Like, if you're a soccer player, you're going to have great endurance. You're going to have a lot of change of direction. If you're a baseball player, you're going to have a lot of power generating from the hip and from the shoulder. basketball, you're going to be doing a tremendous amount of jumping, and you're going to have an endurance component. Football, I probably don't recommend parents putting their kids in contact football until they're at least middle school, if not high school, just because of the dangers and who's coaching them up. But
Can I
I
just,
think
I'm
that,
going to ask you a question regarding that,
yeah,
because there's so much, stuff that's been put out there in transparency now, maybe not fully transparent, but just the injuries that come out of football, especially the head injuries. Um, like, how did you see a lot of that? How valid is it? Is there a lot more injuries out there than people talk about? What's your take on that?
it's difficult because, I mean, not taking into consideration the adults, because again, if you're a player in the NFL and you kind of know you have a concussion, but you know that you're not a superstar player and you need to play and you need that game check, you might not disclose. I think they've done a great job now of identifying, because you have an independent spotter during the game say, hey, this looks like this guy got a head injury. They'll buzz down and that person has to get evaluated by an independent, neurologist and third party
Oh,
instead
I
of
didn't know
somebody on the
that.
team.
Interesting.
But from a youth perspective, um, some kids just don't know, the way they're taught how to tackle, the way that they play the game. If they're not taught how to tackle with their head up, head across, making sure that they see exactly what they're doing instead of putting their head down and going for the big hit, then some of these kids are just used to doing that. So yeah, their head hurts and they might have a concussion, but they just associate it with, oh, that was just a big hit. I knocked that guy out. It's like, well, no, you probably had a micro concussion or an actual concussion. I remember when I played high school football, I got an actual concussion, and I knew I did because we were on punt, and I was going down as a gunner, and our punt returner happened to be a 245-pound guy who could run a 4.5, which was ridiculous. So we both went low. I tried to go low to tackle him. He also went low too. It just happened. So we both went helmet to helmet, and I got knocked down, and it hurt because he was 80 pounds bigger than me. And the trainer kind of evaluated me. He's like, yeah, I think you definitely got a concussion. You're going to be irritable. You're going to be sensitive to light. Hopefully those symptoms go away in a couple days. And this was back then before we knew certain things of what to do, if you do end up getting diagnosed with a head injury. And I remember my mom taking me, they called her, said, hey, this is what's going on. So I wasn't going to drive home. She came and picked me up, and she's like, do you want to get some food? I said, yeah. So we went to the drive-through just because it was, the easiest thing to do. And I remember being so irritated. Like, I wanted to get the food quickly and just get home, and it was taking too long. And I wanted to yell at the person behind the just because I was just so irritated because of that head injury. But I think when it comes to these young kids, it's hard because there's not a ton of data that's getting reported as much as it is in college and pro. So you just don't know, you run the risk of these kids going undiagnosed, and what could be the potential long-term consequences. I would say, yeah, there could be some there, but as long as it's not repeated regularly.
Interesting. So I don't know if the environment's the same in the US, but in Canada here's what I'm noticing. Things have changed since we grew up.
Mm.
I'm a little bit older than you, but things have changed. I don't see that many kids biking around by themselves anymore. I don't see kids like we grew up. We used to play street basketball. We used to play soccer, like not in organized leagues, but we would just go out there. We would find a bunch of kids and start playing. Or football. We used to play a lot of tag football, but I don't see that anymore. Are you finding that trend as well?
Yeah, and I mean, given the circumstances now, there's a reason for it, and we can understand that kids shouldn't be out and about, and
Yeah.
parents want to protect their children. But I think part of it too is, even before 2020 went down, I mean, the incidence of kids playing in parks and going out and doing things and in their own neighborhoods and streets goes down, because now people in general are just a little bit more, I guess, introverted with what they're doing, because now you have every kind of entertainment, anything that you want at your fingertips within the house. So what's the incentive of going out and finding entertainment when you can stay indoors, stay safe, not have to expose yourself to the outdoor elements and conditions. And now, kids are spending more time in front of screens. Parents are like, well, I don't want to let my kid out because what happens if he gets hurt, or what happens if, God forbid, somebody, takes him or steals him, which, I mean, obviously that is a very real fear and should be taken into consideration. But I remember, yeah, like you said, I remember growing up in our neighborhood, we had tons of kids that went to our elementary school. Some of them were older. So whenever the older kids wanted to play basketball, we thought it was so cool that we could be on their team too. Or we'd go to this house up the street. They had um, a trampoline, something that my parents would never buy us. So we would be out just jumping on that thing for hours just because it was the coolest thing ever. And staying out until I remember one day I was with one of my elementary school friends up the street, and we were just going in and around the neighborhood, in the back of their houses, into their backyards, even though we probably shouldn't have been doing that. But at that time, it wasn't necessarily frowned upon because it's like, oh, it's the kids in the neighborhood. They're playing. They're not really, causing any trouble. Just let them, run around the yards, play tag and this and that. And it got past dinner time, and I didn't know because I didn't have a watch. And so my mom was walking up and down the street trying to find me because she didn't know what happened to me. And we were, I think we were at the trampoline just bouncing. And then I kind of looked from the side and I see her walking in between the houses to us. And she was like, come on, come on. I'm like, oh man, I'm in trouble. I'm going to get it. And I could see it from her perspective. I was supposed to be home, an hour and a half ago, and she doesn't know where I'm at. And there's no word because, we didn't have cell phones or any way to track it. So from a parent's perspective, I can imagine like, oh man, where's my son and what is he doing? And hope he's okay and nothing's going on. I think some of that has to do with it. But then just the modernization of the conveniences that we have. I mean, if you want food delivered, you want something from Amazon, you want, TV and entertainment. I mean, it's all right here. You don't have to go leave the house to get any of it.
Yeah, and it just, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking of my childhood. We used to do the same thing. We used to go biking literally for hours and just go. I look back and I'm like, wow, we biked far. Or we used to play hide and seek with all our neighborhood kids, and we would jump into people's backyards. It was like this massive area. Now we play hide and seek with my kids inside the house, which is a little bit different. But I think the environment is totally changed. I remember the 80s and the 90s. I'm a big fan of them. I think kids right now are a little bit too sheltered personally. How much time do you think is ideal or optimal for kids, or minimum time that they should be spending just doing athletic activities each day?
I think just being able to be active, and again, nothing specific, at least, 45 minutes to an hour. Again, that's what we're required to do as humans. We're supposed to be moving. We're supposed to be, kids don't necessarily need structured exercise. The stuff they run around already as much as you already know with two young children, they're nonstop, they're go. But having something to say, hey, we're going to go to the park for an hour. You guys are going to get on the jungle gym. You guys are going to go on the swing. You guys are going to get on the monkey bars and do all that. That in itself is really important for them to get a chance to be outdoors, get the benefits of being under sunlight, being in nature, but also if there's a socialization aspect of it too. That's incredibly important that they're not going to be able to get sitting indoors. And again, now circumstances are different, but if that's a possibility, that could be something that parents could aim for. And I know it's a lot of time during the day especially for busy parents that are entrepreneurs that have jobs. But if that somehow can be worked in, maybe in small chunks, maybe like early in the morning, hey, we're going to go for a walk. We're going to run around. And then later in the evening, hey, as a family, we're going to go for a walk. So, you may have 10 to 15 minutes there. And if there's that potential to say maybe during the day, if there's 30 minutes or so, we're going to try to just go outside, watch them play, run around the driveway or the neighborhood while there's supervision, while, a parent can maybe get some work done or be on the phone, multitask it that way. I think that's one way to kind of look at it, though it doesn't all have to be all at once.
So I have to ask you then, because this is something that I always wonder. I'm like, what if my parents put me in this sport or this activity? Would I have turned out a little bit better in doing this? Like I always want to do gymnastics, for example. I was in martial arts for a little bit, but I grew up in a small town where there was one martial arts instructor, and we did it partway through, and then he just took off. I don't know what he did. He just took off, and we were like, okay, so what do we do now? So what activity would you recommend for kids? Like, is balance more important? Should they be put in things like gymnastics? Is it coordination? Is it a team sport? Mm-hmm. Like, what, from your perspective, like you're seeing athletes, because athletes need balance, right? They need certain muscle tone or whatever it is, like you said. What is the most, it might be hard for you to answer, but what is the most important skill you could say, if you could narrow it down?
Oh, that's really tough. And I'd say it's hard to narrow down because so many sports, and each of the, those sports specific skills, there's a lot of transfer over. So you need balance, coordination, strength, endurance, speed, stamina, power. But some of that a lot of that can be developed once the kids get to adolescent age, and you can really say, all right, we're going to go through a proper lifting program that's focused more on full range of motion and knowing how to do the movement instead of how much they're looking to move weight wise. I think any and everything is open. If kids get a chance, I think gymnastics is fantastic. I had cousins that started early on, that they had such a great base level of body weight strength compared to what I was doing. Like they were pulling out like squats and pull-ups and push-ups, and I was watching them like, my younger cousins are way stronger than I am. Like, this is BS. I'm looking at my parents like, how come this wasn't a thing? And even martial arts, it teaches discipline, it teaches body awareness and self-confidence. I think some of that stuff is great. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, Johnny's going to play soccer from age 5 until hopefully he makes it to, the EPL or the MLS or the U.S. men's national team. It's like, no, get a chance to see what they're really interested in. It could be, it could be swimming. It could be soccer. It could be basketball. That's an easy one too, that young kids can play. But I think the main thing is not just sticking with one sport, because when you look at all of these kids that develop incredible amount of athleticism that go from high school to college to the NFL, and you look at what these 5-star recruits are rated, almost all of them are multi-sport athletes. So they didn't specialize in one. I mean, every now and then you're going to have a Tiger Woods, but then even somebody like Roger Federer did not like tennis to begin with. That wasn't his best sport. He played a few other things and then just realized, like, shoot, he's just really good at tennis. It became the best ever. So yeah, once you have some identification there, like, obviously by all means, go ahead and be the best ever. But specializing in one sport is one of those things that I would not recommend. And a lot of the data supports that, because one, it leads to burnout. If the kid's only doing one thing all year round, it's just not that much fun. And they don't get much downtime, because when you're not competing, you're training. And then when you're not training, you're competing. So the kids just don't get much time to just decompress, not go through the same motions and muscle groups to actually allow their body to get stronger. And then when you work different muscle groups from different sports, like say, because I remember this, we had a track athlete at the University of Oregon who's an Olympian level athlete. So, I mean, he's just running in a straight line, but he also loved football. He might've loved football more than that. So there's a lot of transitional relationships between running track and football. You got speed development for skill players, but he had 2 ACL injuries because his position in football required him to do a lot of hard decelerations, change of direction, and he wasn't getting that in track. So in my head, I'm thinking he's going through the entire, January through, summer doing track stuff, when all his teammates are going through winter conditioning. They're doing sprints, they're doing accels, decels, they're doing a lot of weight room focus on the different movements and the 3 different planes. And he's not necessarily getting that because he's focused on running in this direction. I talked to him about it, and he's like, well, yeah, I take a big transition with the way my body is and how I have to be a little bit lighter, because the power weight ratio means a lot more in track than it is. And then he bulks back up a little bit for football because he needs that padding to be able to take and sustain the punishment. So I'm thinking, man, if those could complement each other a lot better way. So if you know what you're doing on one end and what you're doing on the other end, they should be able to overlap, so these injuries wouldn't happen. So the same thing with a lot of these other kids. They're only doing one sport, they're doing the same movement patterns, and then the second they transition and try to do something else, the body's not used to it. Could be an incredible amount of force applied, and then boom, you have an increased risk for injury, or you have an injury. And it's like, shoot, if these kids were just a lot more well-rounded, which is what I'd say for a lot of the younger kids, become more well-rounded. And then as you continue to grow, as your body develops, like some of these kids are going to keep gaining size until they're in college. I just talked to a kid in college say, yeah, I just grew an inch this year, and he's 21 years old. I'm like, oh my God, like, can I get some of that? I think the specialization piece is hurting a lot of kids too.
Yeah, that's important. And I think you said something that really just popped up for me, for not just athletes, but just people in general. Like, I'm only 41. My sport is weight training. That's what I love to do. I compete with myself. And one of the things that holds me back, and I could see it for other athletes, this has happened to my brother and all my friends and everything, is injuries. Mm-hmm. If I take a look at the one most common thing that people hate that stops them from being able to excel or do the things that they love to do, is injuries. It's hurting themselves, whether that's a result of not doing things properly. I can tell you, I used to do a lot of powerlifting when I was a kid. And although I thought I knew a lot of stuff, I was a personal trainer at 17. There's still stuff at that time that I didn't know. There was a lot of science that wasn't out at that time. So it was just sheer weight, like the old Arnold style, which is push heavy, right? Push heavy,
Yeah.
heavy, heavy. And I did some damage to my back as a result of that. I've compressed discs that I can't squat heavy or put any pressure on the back of my spine directly down. So I have to do like a modified squat, for example. And so I think this is something important for parents. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because I think if we paid more attention to that for kids when they're younger and teach them proper ways to recover and look out for injuries, I think it could save them a lot of headache for when they're adults and for the later years in their life.
Yeah, I think this is a huge thing to be able to talk about, because whether it's coming from the parents wanting their kids to be the best, so pushing them to say, hey, we got to get stronger, we got to get bigger, or the kids not wanting to disappoint their parents, but also being very competitive, but also having that youthful exuberance where they're not going to get tired. An injury here or there, or just a little bit of discomfort, it's not the same for them as it would be for us. Like if I get discomfort in the weight room, I'm stopping. I'm like, I'm gonna stretch, I'm gonna roll out. One of my best friends is a DPT. My sister's a DPT too. If it's really bad, I'll, call her up and say, hey, can you give me some advice? And I'll live to fight another day. But some of these kids are just so, their bodies haven't been put through a ton of stress that they can be resilient enough to get through it. But over time, especially at a young age, if you're not doing something properly, when it comes to weightlifting or when it comes to specific movements, going through the proper patterns, knowing how to do a squat or press or throw or rotation or lunge, over time, this is going to cause a lot of problems. And then you compound that with kids these days. Maybe they're not eating very well. They just don't have a well-rounded diet. They're not getting enough macro micronutrients. Again, that's individualistic. Or they're not recovering because they're not sleeping very well. They're staying up too late. They're in front of screens all the time. So a ton of blue light stimulation. That's not going to allow their body to recover the way it needs to, which is the only time that happens is when we sleep as humans. And that's what I get afraid of, is sometimes maybe they start weightlifting too young. Now, there's nothing wrong with kids weightlifting if they first learn how to do the body weight movements, and then they graduate to maybe like a PVC pipe or a dowel or a broom, to be able to understand, like, hey, if you have weight on your back, this is what a squat should look like. It should feel like. If you're lying on the ground and you're doing a press, this is what a bench should look like. Those kind of movements, instead of, hey, let's grab the bar, let's start. I think parents and kids probably go 0 to 100 really too quickly. And then these injuries happen because, look, you've overloaded them with more than they can handle. The form is bad, and now you have a long-term injury that the kid's going to have to deal with. And it's going to stick with them, and it's going to derail their athletic potential. And what parents need to realize is, don't chase numbers when these kids are young. Like they can get strong in high school. They can get strong in college. Heck, they can get strong. I think it was Tyrann Mathieu of the Chiefs. He just tweeted out last week, like, hey, I just PR'd in squat for the second time this season. Like, you can gain strength, but you have to be able to have a proper athletic base. You have to know how to do the movements correctly. That is first and foremost. Like there's no advantage getting your kids super strong or attempting them to have back squat, 135 pounds or 225 pounds before they, reach certain ages of, the stages of maturation. And I think a lot of parents, could be alleviated to know that, but they can also start learning body weight movements. They can start doing, once they've shown proficiency in that, they can go to the PVC pipe and dowels. Once they show proficiency in that, they can start loading and showing that they can do the movement with no pain, showing that they're developing confidence, that they like it, and then slowly add on from there instead of going all in at once.
Yeah, that's really important. Thanks for bringing that up. So if someone's out there and saying, hey, look, I want my son or my daughter to be the next Eli or whoever it is, Olympic athlete, do you train kids at a certain age then?
Like, what I do is if it's locally, then yes, because I'm in the Kansas area, I can put together certain, movement workouts that they can start learning to do based on their situation. Put together I think what a lot of parents reach out to me, especially high school parents and even middle school, is, I just don't know how my kids should eat. Like, they're active in these sports, this is what they do during the day, but I don't know how to teach them to eat to meet energy needs, but also to support growth and maturation. Because just like with everybody, there's so much information out there, and most adults are confused. And if they're parents, then obviously it's going to be important for them to teach their kids what to do, because kids are going to mimic and mirror everything the parents do too. So a lot of parents reach out to me and say, hey, I've got a youth basketball player, I've got a track athlete, he's got good size, but he's just really razor thin and he can't keep on any weight. I'm like, all right, well, let's meet. Let's do a full assessment. Let's learn about, let me learn about your son, everything that he's going through, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what his schedule is. And let's put together some ideas on what he can eat to support his energy needs, to make sure he feels really good and to help him put on muscle mass appropriately without, doing these crazy things or, coming up and having to default to supplements, because kids really don't need to get into all that. They have enough energy as it is.
Yeah, it's more the diet and doing it properly. So where can people go to find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm very active on social media, on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Pratik Patel for both. Probably the most people reach out to me through that. I try to post a lot of just different content, things that I've learned over the past 20 years. Once I got into nutrition, fitness, and exercise, especially the last 11, working with athletes, just trying to share my experiences and things, my observations. But feel free, if anybody has any additional questions or wants to reach out, they can contact me on those channels. And again, it's not just for youth athletes. I work with, adults as well, a lot of adult males too.
That's awesome. Thank you. So for those of you out here listening, I highly encourage you to reach out to Pratik. He's obviously got some awesome expertise. Pratik, I want to have you on the show again because there's so many other questions I have as a dad, as a parent, to pick your brain. So thank you so much for being here today. And we'll bring you back on someday.
No, I love it. This is a lot of fun. Love to come back.
Yeah, thanks. Have an awesome day.
You too.
So that was awesome. For those of you sports fans out there or parents that are just looking to have your kids be a little bit more athletic or successful in life, I got a ton of value from that. I think Pratik has a wealth of knowledge, and it's so important because we talked about so many different things. And I think as parents, one of the things that just keeps coming up for me is how do I get them to do things and not make the mistakes that I made? Like the injuries that we talked about. And I'm sure, like, when I look back to my younger years, I just did things out of sheer will. And it wasn't based on any information. It wasn't based on real science, you could say, or the information that was available at that time. But I think as parents, we have a responsibility to give the best information, to give the best training to our kids, and not just kind of wing it. And that doesn't mean that you have to get a personal trainer for your kids. It just means that we just have to be a little bit more responsible, a little bit more intentional, give a little bit more time to our kids. But I think Pratik put something else into perspective as well, is as parents, it's not about pushing your kid to the max when they're younger. It's about just letting them have fun, about being able to pick their own interests. Because I think ultimately that's what's going to allow them to be motivated. And we know that motivation is the number one driving factor for people to be successful. If they're not motivated, they're not going to be successful in whatever task, whether that's in their career or that's in sports. They're just not going to be able to do it. So motivation is important. So, I had an awesome time chatting with Pratik. I hope you got some value from there. If you haven't had an opportunity to get a copy of my book, The Complete Man, please do. You can get the audio book for free right now. It's absolutely free at no cost by going to CompleteManAudio.com and using the promo code LimitedFree. So I talk about all the things when it comes to being a successful man in today's world. So how do you be that successful father? How do you be that successful husband? How do you be that successful businessman or have that career? And bring all of those elements together, because there's a lot on our shoulders, right? Especially right now with COVID happening. You might be feeling down and out, or the challenges with maybe you've lost your job or the social isolation, whatever it is. I show you a lot of strategies in this book to get through and do it properly and do it effectively and have that inner power that you've always wanted or looking for. So join us next Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. In the meantime, please like and share this with your network. I wish you the very best and hope you have an awesome day. Take care.